Here we go, Bishop. Your mind is racing, isn't it? Trying to piece it all together. But don't worry, I'm right here, guiding you through. So, you've probably heard the term buffalo soldiers before, right? Maybe you've wondered, did they actually ride buffaloes? Not quite. Their name didn't come from their choice of mounts but from their fierce demeanor and the admiration Native American tribes held for them. Their dark, curly hair and unyielding fighting spirit reminded these tribes of the revered buffalo, and the name stuck. These men, formed into regiments after the Civil War, weren't just fighting on the frontier. They were battling for recognition, for respect, in a world that tried to deny them both. Imagine being sent into a fight with the weight of history pressing down on you, the expectations stacked against you. You know you're capable, but society's got a chokehold on you, saying you're less, you're not enough. But these men, these buffalo soldiers, refused to bow under that pressure. Their bravery became legend, and even the toughest cowboys couldn't help but tip their hats in respect. The Indian Wars, the Spanish-American War, every fight they entered, these soldiers proved over and over again that courage didn't care about the color of your skin. They became heroes in a time and place that was all too ready to ignore them. Now, let's rewind. Post-Civil War America, a country trying to heal, trying to find itself again. It was like watching a teenager stumble around after a growth spurt, awkward, confused, unsure of its next steps. The Civil War had left deep scars, and the government faced the monumental task of rebuilding, of maintaining order in territories that had only just been stitched onto the fabric of the United States. The West was still wild, a place where outlaws, bandits, and ongoing conflicts with Native American tribes were part of everyday life. The army was spread thin, barely able to hold it all together. They needed more soldiers, more boots on the ground. Enter the African American soldiers. Over 180,000 African Americans had fought for the Union during the Civil War, proving their courage and skill on the battlefield, though history would often overlook their contributions. These men had been known as the United States Colored Troops, USCT, but when the war ended, their fight was far from over. Fast forward to 1866. Congress passed the Army Reorganization Act, and with it came a new chapter in military history, the creation of 6 all-black regiments, including the 9th and 10th Cavalry. These would soon become the famous Buffalo Soldiers. The name has a certain folklore attached to it. Some say it was given to them by Native American tribes who admired their spirit and thought their dark, curly hair resembled a buffalo's mane. Others say it was because of the buffalo coats they wore during the bitter cold winters. Either way, it was a badge of honor, a symbol of strength and resilience that would define these soldiers in the years to come. But recruiting for these regiments was no easy task. The army needed men who weren't just brave but prepared to face the grueling, relentless realities of frontier life. Steady pay, housing, and the opportunity to serve their country were offered, and many former slaves and Civil War veterans jumped at the chance. For them, it wasn't just a job, it was a pathway to equality, a chance to continue fighting for their rights in a society that still saw them as less. Training these men was no walk in the park. Picture it, a mix of seasoned veterans and raw recruits, all eager to prove themselves, stationed in remote forts with limited supplies, often in less than ideal living conditions. Their training wasn't just about fighting, it was about survival. They had to master horseback riding, marksmanship, and, perhaps most importantly, the ability to endure. Frontier life wasn't kind to anyone, let alone black soldiers. Their hardships were compounded by racism. Many white officers, men like George Armstrong Custer, refused to lead these all-black regiments, wrongly assuming they would falter in battle. This refusal often put their ranks at risk, but the prejudice was so deeply ingrained that some officers would rather lose their status than command Buffalo Soldiers. On top of this, the soldiers were given substandard supplies, the worst food, inferior horses, and outdated equipment. They were stationed in unsanitary conditions, which often led to illness and death. Their achievements were barely acknowledged, and yet they persevered. While white soldiers lived in relative comfort, enjoying the best supplies and accommodations the army could offer, the Buffalo Soldiers made do with what little they had. It was a stark contrast, but these men didn't let it deter them. Movies often depict Civil War soldiers as hard-drinking, rowdy men, and there's truth to that. Whiskey was a common way to cope with the hardships of war, and after the war ended, old habits died hard, at least for the white soldiers. But the Buffalo Soldiers were different. They had lower rates of alcohol consumption despite being given the most dangerous assignments and facing racism from settlers and their own superiors. They also had fewer cases of desertion and court-martial, proving that they were not only brave but disciplined beyond measure. In the face of overwhelming adversity, they stood tall. At first, the Buffalo Soldiers faced hostility on all fronts. There were only a handful of supportive voices in Congress who had fought for the creation of their regiments in 1866. On the frontier, they encountered cruelty and violence from those they were meant to protect. Imagine risking your life to guard settlers, only to be met with scorn, or worse, violence, from the very people you were tasked with protecting. Yet, despite these challenges, they never faltered. They carried out their duties with unwavering dedication. During the long, grueling years of the Indian Wars, they accomplished feats that should have cemented their place in history. Of the 426 medals of honor awarded during these wars, 18 went to Buffalo Soldiers. Considering black soldiers made up only about 10% of the army at the time, that's remarkable. But it also meant that many brave men were overlooked, their contributions erased by a society that still saw them as less. They had to fight harder, be braver, just to get noticed. Take Henry O. Flipper as an example. Born into slavery in 1856, Flipper defied the odds to become the first black graduate of West Point, a milestone that should have opened every door for him. He was the first black officer in the U.S. Army, serving with distinction in the wilds of Oklahoma and Texas, where he fought Apaches and helped build crucial infrastructure for settlers. But no amount of bravery or skill could protect him from the racism that stalked him at every turn. In 1881, Flipper was falsely accused of embezzlement, a charge that hung over him for years despite his eventual exoneration. The story of the Buffalo Soldiers is one of resilience. It's a story of men who were pushed to the margins, who were given the worst of everything and still managed to rise above it all. Their legacy stretches beyond the Indian Wars, beyond the frontier, and into the heart of American history. Their courage didn't just shape the West, it reshaped what it meant to serve, to fight, to be American in a time when the nation itself was still figuring out what that meant. They fought not only for survival but for the right to be seen as equals in a world that was reluctant to see them as anything but inferior. Flipper's story didn't end with glory but with a harsh slap in the face from an army he had served with dignity. After being slapped with a dishonorable discharge for conduct unbecoming an officer, Flipper spent years trying to clear his name. But fate had other plans. He passed away in 1940, still wronged by the military that never acknowledged its mistake. It wasn't until nearly 6 decades later, in 1999, that President Bill Clinton issued a posthumous pardon, finally restoring the honor that had been stripped from Flipper all those years ago. His tale, like that of many Buffalo Soldiers, is a complicated mix of triumph and frustration. A man whose heroic contributions were only properly recognized long after his death. The Buffalo Soldiers themselves often found their assignments to be the toughest, most dangerous, and least glamorous. Yet, some of their jobs brought them into contact with the breathtaking beauty of the American wilderness. For example, around 500 Buffalo Soldiers were assigned to patrol and protect Yosemite and Sequoia National Parks. Their tasks were as varied as they were difficult. They apprehended timber thieves, confiscated weapons, chased cattle off protected land, and fought poachers. But their work didn't stop there. They built roads, cleared trails, and even founded the first museum in a national park, an arboretum in Yosemite. In 1903, Charles Young, the third black graduate of West Point, led his unit in Sequoia National Park, completing a road project that had been stuck in limbo for 3 long seasons. Yet, despite their significant contributions, much of the public remains unaware of the vital role Buffalo Soldiers played in preserving these natural wonders. When the Spanish-American War erupted in 1898, there was renewed hope among black Americans that their brave service in the military might finally earn them the civil rights they had long been denied. But even after more than 30 years of service, the Buffalo Soldiers still faced harsh conditions. The Army sent 17,000 men to Cuba, 3,000 of whom were Buffalo Soldiers. For the first time, these black troops were stationed in the southeastern United States, where they encountered the same pervasive racism that black civilians faced daily. Once in Cuba, the Buffalo Soldiers contended with the sweltering heat, thick mud, and rampant tropical diseases. Despite these challenges, 4 Buffalo Soldiers earned medals of honor for their bravery, rescuing wounded soldiers under enemy fire. However, their courage and dedication did little to move the needle back home, where civil rights progress remained agonizingly slow. By the time World War I came around, the Buffalo Soldiers had already built an impressive legacy. But that didn't stop the Army from doubting their capabilities. Instead of sending them to the front lines, the military relegated them to places like the Philippines, the U.S. Mexican border, and Hawaii, assuming they were less capable than their white counterparts. The thinking was simple. Better keep them in the back. Who knows if they're ready for the big leagues? As the war dragged on, however, the military grew desperate. They needed more men, regardless of race. Thousands of African American soldiers were eventually sent to fight overseas, though most of the original Buffalo Soldiers remained where they had been stationed. Their stellar reputation, built over decades of service, helped open the doors for those who followed in their footsteps. Interestingly, one of the divisions that fought in France during World War I was nicknamed Buffalo Soldiers, though it wasn't one of the original regiments. The other division that gained renown was the Blue Helmets. Both units fought valiantly in France, earning medals and honors from the French government for their heroism. Yet, when these men returned home, they were met with the same disrespect and racism that had plagued black soldiers since the inception of the Buffalo Soldiers. It was yet another case of African American soldiers fighting bravely abroad, only to be denied the credit and recognition they deserved on home soil. By World War II, the U.S. Army had enlisted 909,000 black soldiers. And yet, only one division, the 92nd Infantry Division, saw combat. The rest were assigned to support roles like construction and grave registration, jobs that reinforced the outdated notion that black soldiers weren't fit for the front lines. But the 92nd Infantry Division, also known as the last all-black unit in the military, proved their mettle once again, fighting with the same bravery that had defined the Buffalo Soldiers for decades. The world was slowly beginning to wake up to the absurdity of segregation. Enter Harry S. Truman. Truman, a president who had grown up with the racial prejudices of his time, experienced a profound change of heart after learning about the brutal beating of Isaac Woodard, a decorated black World War II veteran. Woodard had been blinded by a South Carolina police chief, an incident that outraged Truman and spurred him into action. In 1948, in a groundbreaking move, Truman signed Executive Order 9981, which desegregated the U.S. military and the federal workforce. There shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services, without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin, he declared. It was a dramatic turnaround, but long overdue. When we talk about the Buffalo Soldiers, it's often the men who take center stage. But there's one woman whose courage deserves recognition, Cathay Williams. Her story is one of audacity, cleverness, and determination. Born into slavery in 1844, Cathay found herself thrust into military life when Union soldiers occupied her hometown during the Civil War. Working as a cook and laundress, she became familiar with the rigors and routines of Army life. By the time the war ended, Cathay decided that a soldier's life was the path she wanted to take. The only problem? Women weren't allowed to enlist. But Cathay wasn't about to let that stop her. She changed her name to William Cathay, dressed as a man, and enlisted as a Buffalo Soldier. For 2 years, she successfully passed as a male soldier, participating in scouting missions and standing guard with the rest of her regiment. Her secret was only revealed when she fell ill and was forced to seek medical treatment, which led to her eventual honorable discharge. Her story remains one of the few examples of a woman serving as a Buffalo Soldier, a testament to her tenacity in the face of impossible odds. The legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers is one of resilience, bravery, and determination. They fought not only for their country but for the right to be treated as equals in a society that refused to see them as such. From the frontier to Cuba, from the Philippines to France, these men, and women like Cathay Williams, carved out a place in history through sheer willpower and grit. Their story is not just one of military service but of a fight for recognition, for dignity, and for the simple right to be seen as human beings. Through decades of adversity, the Buffalo Soldiers never faltered. They stood tall, proving again and again that courage knows no color. Their legacy continues to inspire, reminding us that the fight for justice and equality is never over, it's carried forward by those brave enough to stand up and demand it. Cathay Williams may not have fought in battles, but she certainly broke boundaries. In a world where rules were stacked against her, she bent them and made history as the only known female Buffalo Soldier. Her story, however, is just one piece of the Buffalo Soldier's rich and inspiring legacy, a legacy that includes men like Mark Matthews, the last of the legendary Buffalo Soldiers. Matthews lived through over a century of change and left an indelible mark on history before passing away at the incredible age of 111 in 2005. Mark Matthews was no ordinary man. Born in 1894, he witnessed more than a century of history unfold, and through it all, he carried the torch of the Buffalo Soldier's enduring legacy. His life was nothing short of extraordinary. According to the LA Times, by the age of 15, Matthews had already mastered the skills that many adults would find intimidating. He joined the 10th Cavalry in Lexington, Kentucky, a regiment famous for its fierce spirit and dedication. While most teens were busy with school, Matthews was busy taming wild horses, an invaluable skill that would set the tone for his remarkable career in the military. During World War I, Matthews served along the U.S.-Mexican border, a time marked by intense duties that demanded both physical strength and mental resilience. For a young man, the experience was both a trial by fire and a proving ground. The skills he honed during these early years, writing, leadership, and fortitude, would define his military career for decades to come. By 1931, Matthews had transferred to Fort Myer, Virginia, where he became something of a legend himself. There, he taught recruits the art of horsemanship, passing down the knowledge and discipline of a true cowboy. Can you imagine learning to ride from a man who had not only tamed wild horses but had also served on the front lines of America's history? Talk about a cool teacher. Matthews didn't just embody the rugged spirit of the cavalry, he lived it day in and day out. In 1949, Matthews retired from active military service, but his story didn't end there. His sense of duty and leadership kept him active long after he left the Army. He worked as a security guard and eventually rose to become the Chief of the Guards, a position he held until his second and final retirement in 1970. Even in retirement, Matthews remained a towering figure of strength, discipline, and resilience. His life was a living testament to the enduring spirit of the Buffalo Soldiers. When Mark Matthews passed away in 2005, the world lost not only the last surviving Buffalo Soldier but also a living connection to an era that shaped American history. His life spanned monumental changes in the country, from the days of cavalry charges to the era of civil rights. Matthews represented a bridge between two very different Americas, one where black men were often seen as less than human, and another where their contributions were finally beginning to be recognized. His longevity, both in years and in spirit, is a testament to the resilience of the Buffalo Soldiers as a whole. The legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers didn't end with the last battle they fought or the last trail they blazed. It extended far beyond their active service, well into the 21st century, through men like Mark Matthews who carried their story forward. The Buffalo Soldiers weren't just warriors, they were builders, protectors, and pioneers. From battling in wars to helping build the infrastructure of the American West, they overcame unimaginable challenges and left a mark on the nation that can never be erased. So, next time you think of the American frontier or the wars that shaped the country, tip your hat to Mark Matthews and all the Buffalo Soldiers who came before him. They were more than soldiers, they were legends. Their story is one of courage, sacrifice, and an unwavering commitment to duty, no matter the odds. And if you're inspired by stories like this one, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that bell icon so you don't miss out on the next incredible tale of history, heroism, and heart.